Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm going to be talking about the first album from Q-Burn's Abstract Message, Feng Shui. Alright, so where to begin with this guy? Well, his real name is Michael Donaldson. He lives in Orlando, here in the USA, joining bands like Magic Sound Fabric and 01 into the list of cool American electronic acts that nobody's heard of. This album is a request from one of my commenters, and I had never heard of this guy before he told me about him. Now, I've had this review sitting in my Google Drive for 2 weeks now, and I've been tossing it around in my head, trying to figure out what to make of it. For a long time, I could not think of anything that this album reminded me of. It was such a weird entity on its own. It was a weird mishmash of dance and downtempo and presented in a very lighthearted and intentionally odd manner. Songs often start off a pretty cool melody, then slowly shift and change and morph into something different, or sometimes they just shift abruptly, or sometimes they actually stick to the point, or at least you think they do until you listen really closely and realize that they actually don't. I searched my iPod for a band that actually reminded me of this guy's style, and I eventually arrived one at the very bottom of the list. 808 State. It's not a perfect match, obviously, but they're the closest parallel I can think of off the top of my head. Songs that meander all over the place and never stick to the point are 808 State's bread and butter, though even they can get songs to flow in a logical manner if they really set their mind to it. In that way, their styles are actually very similar, although not identical. 808 State often attempts to go for an aesthetic that people could take more seriously. They usually go for darker and more aggressive sounds, though even when they're trying to make something darker, they are kind of difficult to take seriously. Many of their songs are complete disastrous messes, but it's always a great spectacle. Their melodies were always memorable even when they didn't stick around for long, and every left field twist and turn in their music was glorious. From what I can gather, Q-Burn's more or less adopts the same style, but in a much more down-tempo and relaxed fashion. There's nothing on here as aggressive with its weirdness as songs like Cubic or Banachek. Q-Burn's tends to be a bit more gentle. In fact, his synth tones and atmosphere remind me a lot of sounds from the ground in more than a few spots. Going down track by track, the album begins with He's a Skull, which drops you straight into a funky and foot-tapping beat. Punchy horns, abstract synth melodies, a subtle bass line, a jazzy and danceable beat, and a few voice samples here and there that sound a bit too serious for their own good. This song does a very nice job setting the tone for the album. Solar Car has a bouncier beat and a slicker and smoother groove, and while there's really only one melody, it's difficult to predict where this song is going next. Then there's Jennifer, which is a straight cover of the song by krautrocker group Faust, who I'm admittedly not that familiar with yet. It's based around a repeating guitar line and catchy vocals from Daniel August. And instead of meandering around 808 State style, this song seems to be more concerned with its moody and dreamy atmosphere, which, while more serious than the rest of the album, doesn't feel different enough to sound like it's out of place on this album. I found myself returning to this one probably the most out of all the tracks. Next is the more upbeat Feel, which returns to the lighthearted and silly atmosphere from earlier. There's spoken word vocals from Donaldson himself, I forgot how to feel, and a pretty cool xylophone-ish melody at the end of this song that I like a lot. New Patterns is almost like two different songs at once. The first song based around some chopped up glitchy sample of some Asian sounding instrument that I can't even recognize, but is still pretty catchy. And the second one, which is in a completely different key, and is instead based around some bubbly synth melody that sounds like it came out of an old computer game or something. This track is lots of fun. The title track is next, and this one has a lot of beatboxing and an off-kilter bass line with some high-pitched guitars and synths sprinkled on top. If this song went any longer than it already does, it would be slightly irritating, but it is definitely memorable. Kinda Picky is a more soulful tune, which brings in Leela Bridgeforth on vocals. Her performance on this song is excellent, and quite frankly better than anything Lisa Shaw did on Q-Burn's follow-up album Invisible Airline, but I digress. The song also ends in these cool, slow, high-pitched, reversed guitar noises. Yeah, they're guitars. I played the song in reverse to make sure. Next is AST, which features more vocals from Daniel August. This time, he's not speaking English. At least I don't think he's speaking English. He is a tad creepy here, but not to the point where I feel compelled to skip the song. Then there's the sneaky and vaguely film noirish There Must Be Something, which has this great atmosphere to it that feels like it's the prelude to a car chase in a movie or something. A lot of the synths on here are slightly harsh sounding and atonal, but all this does is prevent the song from getting stuck in my head. I was originally going to pick this one as my least favorite, for just being the least catchy, but once I actually sat down and listened to it, I suddenly realized there was a lot more to it than I thought there was. I should probably mention at this point, I found that this album as a whole is much better when you can give it your full attention than when you just have it on in the background. The album ends with two long extended pieces, Leela and Talking Box. Leela is very abstract and meandering, with melodies that change at a moment's notice, and are rarely tonal enough to get stuck in your head, but make for a highly entertaining and odd listen. Talking Box, on the other hand, is much more straightforward, and actually doesn't meander around much compared to most of the other songs on here, which would be a bit disappointing given its 9-minute length, but its catchy melodies and its light and breezy atmosphere are very well done, and there are just enough little interesting moments to justify the length. Overall, I can't really say whether this album exceeded my expectations, as I kinda had no expectations to begin with going into this album. I will say this, I was highly entertained by what I heard on here. I love how most of these songs meander around 808 State style, and even when they don't, their main melody is usually compelling enough to justify that fact. Though, as much as I mention 808 State, Q-Burn's is clearly different from them. 808 State are a band that commands your full attention even when you wouldn't have otherwise. They're weird and really in your face about it. And yes, I have to say it like that. Q-Burn's isn't nearly as intense as they are, and this leads to him being more of a listening act. If he's in the background, then everything just kind of bleeds together, and only the more straightforward songs like Jennifer, Kinda Picky, and Talking Box stand out. But if you give him your full attention and hear every twist and turn he takes you on, it's a wild and highly entertaining ride indeed, and one I highly recommend you all check out. Overall, I'm feeling an 8.5 out of 10. Favorite tracks, He's a Skull, Jennifer, New Patterns, Kinda Picky, Leela, and Talking Box. Least favorite song, gonna go with AST. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it. Leave the comment things in the comment section and all the rest of it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.